Hello, today we are going to look at the cakes. That's our topic. And before we continue, let's look at today's objectives. So by the end of the lesson, at least define what is a cake decoration, outline the qualities of cake, that is of a good cake, explain importance of cake decoration, describe preparation and cooking methods in cake making, then describe the role or the duty of each and every ingredient that you are using to make cake, and then describe appropriate storage of cakes. So let's start with the methods of preparing cakes. We have four main methods. The first one is creaming. The second one is whisking. Then the third one is rubbing in. And then the fourth one is melting. So we start with the first one. When we talk about creaming, this is where you cream the margarine and the sugar together until they attain a certain texture, that is a fluffy, and then it turns a color. And then after that, after you have creamed the margarine and the sugar, you're supposed to add the fat. So you're supposed to add well-beaten eggs, and then finally you add your sieved flour. And then most of the cakes that use creaming methods, we have the Victoria sandwich, queen cake, and then fruit cake. Those are main cakes that are prepared using creaming method. Then we have whisking method. When we talk about whisking, is where you whisk either the egg white or the whole part of the egg and the caster sugar. You whisk on top of the hot water using a barrel whisk until it doubles in size. And an example of cakes that uses whisking method, we have Swiss roll, we have sponge cake, and genoise sponge. And then the third method is rubbing in. When you talk about rubbing in, it's where you use your fingertips. Make sure your nails are short with no cutex, because you use your fingertips to mix dry ingredients together. So after you have rubbed in, that's when you normally add the wet ingredients. And the reason as to why you do rubbing in is to incorporate in the air. And then we have melting method. When we talk about melting, it's whereby you have to melt all ingredients together. That is the margarine and the sugar. And examples of the cakes that can be produced using this method, we have gingerbread and the chocolate cake. So those are the cakes that can be prepared using the melting method. And then for rubbing in, we have the rock cakes, biscuits, scones, and shortbread. All those uses the rubbing in method, the ones that you use your fingertips. So these are the main methods of preparing cakes. There are so many, but these are the four main methods of preparing cake. Then we have a cake decoration. We have different methods of the cake decoration. And before we move on to the methods, we have reasons as to why or the importance of decorating cake. One is to improve the appearance of the cake. Mostly you see the wedding cakes or the birthday cake, once they are iced, the appearance is improved. And then the other one is to hand flavor. We find some of the, like the cream, the cream we have different types of the flavors. So whenever you use cream, you can add flavor to that cake. That is by icing it. Then another importance of the cake decoration is to give variety to the dish. That means you have different types of cake. There are those that are not iced, and then the others are iced or they are decorated. So by you decorating your cakes, you give them or you give variety to the menu. Maybe for example, you are serving the guests or the customers. There are those guests who will choose to take undecorated cake, while the others might choose the decorated cake. Then another importance of the cake decoration, it helps the cake to keep for a longer time. Like the wedding cakes, you find you can prepare a wedding cake 1 month earlier. By you decorating it, then it can stay for a longer period of time because of the ingredients which you have used to decorate. So let's look at the types of cake decoration. There are so many, but I'm going to give you the common ones. We have plastic. We have a royal icing. We have butter icing. We have glaze icing or decoration, etc. So when we talk about the plastic icing, this is known as the fondant, also known as the fondant. It's very common in wedding cakes. And the ingredients here, we have the icing sugar, glucose syrup, gelatin, water, and glycerin. So you mix all those ingredients together, you make a paste, you roll it like a chapati, and then you cover your cake. Then the other one, the royal icing. This one you use icing sugar. You just use icing sugar and lemon. That is a lemon juice, and just egg. You use egg white. The egg white, because of the smell. You find the yolk, it has a lot of smell. So that's why you use the egg white. Egg white. And then you use some lemon juice at least to counteract that smell of the egg white. So you just mix your sugar with the egg white, you make paste, and then you apply onto your cake. Then we have butter icing. This is a very common. You just use margarine or butter. The margarine or butter, depending with what you have. And then icing sugar. You can add an essence, just for flavor. So with this one, just use margarine. You mix with the icing sugar. You can melt margarine or the butter, whatever you're using, and then you use the wooden spoon. Then you make butter, that's what's called the butter icing, and then you apply onto your cake. Then this one is so simple. We just use water, and the icing sugar. Water and icing sugar. So you have to mix both of them. You sieve, remember here, you have to sieve your icing sugar and then you mix other ingredients. So an assignment, can you find out other types of the cake decoration? There are so many, but these are the common ones. Also, you find nowadays we have the cream. The cream, mostly the one that is used in Black Forest or in sponge cake. That is the cream icing. And then let's look at the storage of cake, how you're supposed to store your cake. One, obvious, store your cake at the right temperature. Two, you store them away from dampy areas. That means don't put them near a place where maybe it is sweating or maybe where there is a water. Then freeze if it to be stored for a long period. So you can freeze it, you can put it in fridge for it to be used later. Then we have folds. We have folds. Folds in cake making. These are the mistakes. The mistakes that we does whenever we are baking cake. For example, you find you bake your cake, and then the moment you are going to remove it out of the oven, you find it has sunk. That's a fault, that's a mistake. Either you opened your oven before the cake set, so you find that product is going to sink. Your final product is going to sink. Or another mistake is when you have not leveled your tray properly, and then you put your mixture inside. You find sometimes it is not straight. Obviously, you'll find your cake will raise in a bad shape. Or when you use a lot of baking powder, your cake is going to crack. All those are faults, the mistakes that can be found when you are making cake. So we start with the first fault, that is uneven texture. And the reason as why you get uneven texture, uneven texture, you have prepared your cake and then it comes out with a bad texture. It has large holes or it has squeezed texture. Reason for that is when you use too much of the liquid, obviously you find your cake will have a bad texture. Then also when you use too little liquid, you find your cake will have a bad texture. And when you are doing rubbing in, that is when you are using your fingertips, you don't rub in properly, you find your final cake or your product will have uneven texture. Mostly the scones, if you don't rub in properly, you will find your scones will have a bad texture. Then we have dry texture. One reason for that is when you overcook your product. That is, if your product stays in the oven for long, obvious the final product will be dry because of the too much heat. And then when you use too much of the raising agent, that is a baking powder or bicarbonate, you find your product will come out when it is dry. When the oven is too hot, remember here when you are baking, you have to set your temperatures because once you put much of the temperature, then your product will come out dry. And when you put a very low temperature, you find your product will not cook well or bake well. So you have to put correct temperature. Then the other reason for dry product or the dry cake is when you use too much liquid, you'll find that your product will be dry. That's another fault. And then another fault, common fault, is when fruit sink. When fruit sink. Reason for that is when you use wet fruits, and then when the oven is too cool. Remember, you have to preheat your oven first. If you don't preheat your oven first, you'll find your product or your fruits, they are going to sink. Then too much of the liquid. And then another fault, another mistake is the cracked products, tears, cracks. And the reason for that is too little liquid used. Obviously, you will find your product is going to crack. And then too much of the baking powder, that is obvious. That's why you're supposed to weigh your ingredients properly. And then when the oven is too hot. So as I wind up, let me give you a good recipe for cake making so that you find your cakes should come out properly. Whenever you use 200 grams of flour, make sure you have used 1 teaspoon of the baking powder. By doing that, you will find your cake or your product will not crack. So your assignment, can you now write the remedies of these faults? What can you do to ensure that maybe your cake will not have an even texture? What you can do to ensure that your cake has not cracked? What can you do to ensure that your cake, the fruits have not sunk?